Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for turning out in such a large numbers. The one very important word which I heard from our President Ashish Vaid's speech is one voice. And this word is going to reverberate from the opening remarks we did. When we are all bogged down by the news of the number of people infected, etc., we should remember that India is the country where it is the lowest number. And now Indian government is all poised to start the operations. And when we want to do that, what exactly we are supposed to do? This presentation is all about, things to do after lockdown. We are not going to talk about any COVID-19 representation to be made to government. We are talking about something to be done internally for our organizations. Since we made this presentation preparation, we have seen the huge increase in webinars, information sessions, and projections for the future. Similar to how this used to be an overload of networking events and seminars, we are seeing now the excitement with which everyone is adopting low-cost alternatives that work, such as video conferencing. We will keep this presentation focused and content-rich. In the comment section, please go ahead and type in any questions you may have, and we will attempt to answer them at the end of the session. The presentation starts with some context to set the stage for the framework. After working through the framework, we will then present a quick checklist that all businesses must work through. We then present some strategies that are common themes across different sectors, and end with one slide summary of 7 hand-picked sectors based on our research. Now, the purpose of this presentation is to share a framework that business leaders may use to navigate the new world order. We are seeing Indians become even more price sensitive due to economic insecurity. We are seeing higher digital engagement and an exponential rise in the attention to wellness and hygiene. People are at home and we expect significant change in the times to come. The fear must not be that we may never return to the good old days. The fear must be what would happen if things return back to normal, and did we learn anything? Within this context, what we want to do here today is to get into the statistics around COVID-19, projections for recovery and expectations for government. There is a lot of material out there on these topics in any case, lots of webinars covering this as well. So we will refrain from those discussions. What you can expect by the end of this presentation is to be armed with specific action items to work on spotlight on focus areas, a COVID-19 checklist, and a discussion on a few hand-picked sectors, though generally it will apply to all the sectors, whether you are in a service sector or in a manufacturing sector. 2020 will revolve around COVID-19. We are all preparing for most of 2020 to revolve around social distancing and combating it. While public health and safety is important, we all recognize that a functioning economy helps ensure the health and safety of most citizens. We are already seeing inequality increasing. 200 million Indians may drop below the poverty line. Striking the right balance requires all of us to permanently change our approach. We must all be mentally prepared, and the times we are living in are here to stay. This situation seems forced not on our terms, and with no time for any of us to plan for it. However, we need to adjust our approach and have the mental fortitude to accept this new world. The only real fear is that we go back to the good old days, because while it took 100 years for the last pandemic, I am reasonably confident we can expect another one soon. Tracing, testing, isolation, minimizing the rate of spread will be the focus at that time as well. Our work now will prepare us for that eventuality. It is important to note that in 1918, international travel volume then was a fraction of what it is today, and yet community transmission resulted in the death of 3% of the world's population. There was 2.5 crores. We will not spend a lot of time talking about this in particular. We'll focus on what we as business leaders, as industrialists, need to do post-lockdown. At Puneet Advisory Services, we have frameworks that assist in our problem-solving endeavors as a consultants. Since we have expertise in turning around stressed assets, we have combined elements from different frameworks and created a post-lockdown framework that can act as a blueprint for business leaders, a step-by-step guide. Today, we are representing a small portion of this framework in this 45 minutes which we have. We hope to cover most of the critical points. As leaders, some of this you may already be working on it. Some will be in your pipeline, and perhaps some of the aspects of the framework will help you give a new perspective as you begin to adjust your approach. This presentation is content heavy. Please remember, please take down notes. In any case, we are going to distribute a copy of the presentation to all of you. And if you email us after this talk, we can share a copy with you too as well. There are three key takeaways from today's presentation. First of all, we are all in the same boat. Our mental models, how we approach new situations, are always driven by related or associated historical context. However, pandemics are unprecedented for all entrepreneurs, especially MSMEs. Accelerated change. Yet with some research, one can draw on parallels globally that drive home the same point. Such crises result in faster adoption of futuristic ideas. Change is thrust upon us with shorter timelines. Prepare so you are better equipped to get through this. And follow the data. Now more than ever, it is crucial to make well-informed decisions based on data and facts from reliable sources. Capital. Capital will look for countries that are less bettered. Western economies have suffered substantially, while countries like India, Indonesia, South Korea, many African countries are not in such bad state. Global capital could flow into India if we can act efficiently as a nation to pave the way for it. This is why the markets have rallied in India so far. Today, we had a market 600 points up. Emotional and economic backlash against China is expected. Already, countries and companies are working on strategy to pivot away from China as part of their supply chains. Recent news show quality defects in medical equipment deliveries around the globe as well. Countries like Japan are promoting Make in Japan for its companies, bringing manufacturing back home. So will we. Businesses need to keep this in mind and work accordingly. Heavily leveraged companies will find it difficult, perhaps pointing to dissatisfactory management practices as well. Capital will remain cautious for all high debt companies with high margin businesses rewarded. With little to no debt and high margin sub-business model will really thrive. A role of management must be understood clearly. What we have learned is just how vulnerable and many companies are. It's sobering truth and harsh reality. How they navigate a crisis depends on the leaders and management of the company. The word resilience is used often. Resilient leadership is an acquired test. It's not born quality. And we must all actively work towards taking on these roles in an informed manner. Setting the stage, MSME vulnerability. We all know that the only 20% of the MSME will have a 6 months or more lifetime minutes with this kind of cash runaway. MSMEs represent 95% of all businesses in India, 70 million in total, while employing 10% of the workforce, that is 110 million. There is a distinct possibility that 40% of all MSMEs will have to shut shop or start insolvency proceedings within the next 18 months. In the US, there are already 26 million newly unemployed workers in the last few weeks alone. The harsh reality MSMEs face is the lack of adequate external financial support to maintain business continuity as a going concern. Be prepared to make tough decisions, communicate with clarity, and recognize that these are necessary steps to survive. MSME vulnerability. Now, in this context, we are putting up a checklist in the framework. Let us dive right to the framework and checklist portion of this presentation, which will be presented by Nishit. Nishit is a mechanical engineering from University of Illinois of Urbana-Champaign. After working with Fortune 100 companies such as Wärtsilä and Cummins in US and Italy, he returned back to India. He runs a logistic tech company called Speedbox, and as a SaaS and a technology company. He also heads a consulting and restructuring practice at Puneet Advisory Services. Over to Nishit. Nishit, please take it.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. So what we've done is we've taken kind of 18 items from our framework, kind of distilled it down to 1 or 2 sentences. And so I'll just get started actually. All right. So leadership in times of crisis. So what do we look at? We look at things like raising awareness, leadership, and contactless work. So what does this mean? When we speak about raising awareness, we talk about the fact that everyone's awareness is actually not based on fact. There is a lot of misinformation being spread, which ends up actually putting lives in danger. We all know about the Bombay incident in the couple of weeks ago. So as leaders, it's our responsibility to raise the right awareness and clearly communicate that you do intend to affect long-term change with this crisis. Now, what we've seen is online sales globally have increased, But what that means is that the less digital, the less tech savvy people in our organizations, they should not feel overmatched or they should not feel left out. And this comes down back to leadership. These are times when people look for a voice, they look for an authority figure, a voice of reason of sorts. So our role as leaders is to write things down, communicate, send out memos, schedule interactions. The president mentioned the same thing, leading with empathy, being human, things like that. Communicating with all our stakeholders is important as leaders. And then we move a step ahead of remote work, right? So contactless work is what we're talking about. Now, we've always been doing remote work. We've always been doing VCs. We've always been working from home. We've always been on phone calls. But the personal interaction is things that people always look out for. People look at, okay, yeah, everything is fine, but milke dekhte hain, right? We'll meet and see what happens. So day-to-day processes have to be redesigned. What we need to do is understand that it's difficult and it's time consuming as well. But if you're really committed to contactless work, it can be done. Like every single process has to be written down and rethought. We then come to the concept of communication. Over communicating is what you need today. This point is actually extremely critical. We come back to this a little later as well. There is no excuse for any of us to not talk to our stakeholders today. We're all at home and available. We then move to reviewing HR policies. And this is kind of a sticking point, right? If companies are not selling while they are expected to continue footing their payroll expenses and their wages, etc., how do we review our HR policies? Now, historically, what has happened is because of the Industrial Revolution, we've looked at time-based performance. So when we have HR policies, we talk about what time did you come in, what time did you leave, 40-hour work weeks, things like that. So it's all been time-based. So we need to actively look at activity-based performances. And your team will communicate, will appreciate transparent communication if you're able to justify any changes in policy if they're activity-based. Finally, we come to decentralization. See, the whole globalization as a concept works because of centralization. Organizations have many processes and teams, but they are centralized based on geographical location. But COVID-19 is going to forever change that. We talk about blockchain technology, we talk about distributed systems. But at the end of the day, all our supply chain, IT, working models, they all have to now start having decentralized nodes so that your entire operation does not collapse because of what gave you the economy of scale. Finally, we focus on a couple of other things that you need to look at as leaders is obviously supply chain, right? Like everybody's talking about, rethinking supply chain, rethinking and reevaluating and alternate sources of suppliers and things like that. But contingency plans are difficult in any event to have, but especially within this scenario, to develop a new contingency plan is very, very difficult. So what we need to do is focus on, more risk management. You need to find, are you able to track your products and goods in real time? Are you able to identify different routes? Are you able to identify different modes of transport? And at the end of the day, what this means is there will be trade-offs, but there are opportunities as well. We then come to voice of the customer, which I think we kind of understand what it is. But when we take voice of customer today, what we need to understand is that customers are going to come back to us and customers will be retained only if you're able to project a public health and hygiene image. So people's behavior patterns, customer behavior will change. And it's highly recommended to set up a dedicated team just to understand your customers better. And that's kind of step one. And then project management, do what we call like a tear down review, right? Like it's a engineering term where you talk about tear down. You really break down all your projects into its constituent parts. You study what your deliverables are. Can you meet them? Can you not meet them? What do you need to renegotiate? What do you need to terminate? So a really project by project review is recommended. Finally, we talk about the fact that we need to adjust our approach. So what that means is both in the near term or short term, as well as medium term, with certain things we need to do today. We understand that, look, all of us kind of operate like firefighters, even at the best of times. But what happens is, in this scenario, we are, anyways firefighting. On top of that, you have to have medium and long-term plans. So it's a very difficult task, right? It's not easy. So recognizing that is really important. So what can you do in the short term? Protect revenue, get deeper into unit economics, do a cost audit if it's required. Understand that you're trading off margins versus a credit period to ensure positive cash flows. And one thing we need to understand is that cash flow management needs to go beyond the finance department. Cash flow management needs to be something that every individual at your company is kind of aware about and working towards the processes that you've created. Finally, when we come to medium-term measures, it's very important to be able to put a number, quantify your financial stress. If you're not able to do that, work with professionals who can do it. Rework your budgets and projections with smaller timeframes. Look at weekly reviews instead of monthly and quarterly reviews, things like that. So if you do not have the right bandwidth or the right systems or the right processes to feed all this data up to you, then you go back to the drawing board to be able to do that, because you do need faster feedback from what's happening on the ground. And finally, preserving capital and going lean. This is a good time to dispose non-essential assets, study inefficiencies and eliminate them. And scenario modeling. Now, scenario modeling has typically been largely theoretical, right? Because when you've been kind of running your business for many years, you can rely on past trends. You can rely on past performance. It's a very common phrase, right? Past performance. So you look at 5 years, take averages, and you're able to kind of predict, but all of that is out of the window now. So now when you do scenario modeling, it will have an impact on your day-to-day life. What will happen is you will need to know what the different versions of your business look like and how will you react in each of these scenarios. And a little bit about the teardown review that we spoke about is new business initiatives. Does this not mean you pause it? Probably a great time to plan new business initiatives. Working capital, a deep dive into working capital is critical. I think we all understand that conceptually. What we're looking at, even really micro stuff like our clients being billed at the right time. Are you paying your suppliers on time? Are you able to manage your inventory more effectively? Can you incentivize your customers to pay early? Avoiding stuff like daily payments, ad hoc payments, consolidate so that your cash flow is, more kind of repeatable and, you can go back to reviewing your commitments as well, which we spoke briefly about already. So I'll skip through this particular point. And more, finally, I would like to spend a little bit of time on technology investments. So if people haven't been investing in technology already, this is a great opportunity to force that change. What something like a pandemic does is accelerates change. That was one of the key takeaways we spoke about in the beginning as well. Everything that we're thinking about and doing now, we had to do anyway, but probably would have taken us 5 or 10 years. It's just that this has now been accelerated. So it's a good opportunity as well. So the goal here with technology investments is obviously to be more connected while you're focusing on data security and access control. This means decentralization, while this also means, looking at smaller building blocks and incorporating technology wherever you can. And then from a tax consideration and legal and compliance, again, from a spirit of time, I won't go through each of this. In any event, we're going to share this presentation. But I guess one thing is very interesting is that from the latest numbers suggest that it's more than 10,000 crores. I think it's around 16,000 crores worth of refunds were processed by the government in these last few weeks. We're talking about GST refunds and things like that. So that's something that you could actively pursue if you have your team working on that. Do pursue refunds aggressively because the government is supporting that. and we'll skip through the legal and compliance side, but do make sure that, you're kind of using professionals, that you can't just terminate contracts, things like that. And we think about force measures. Well, it may be applicable in some cases, it may not be applicable in some cases. And what we have to understand is that the legal route is not going to work, because what will happen is whatever you invoke, the other party is also facing hardship. It's not, so a legal solution is probably not the best thing to go for if you're facing contractual difficulties. But yeah, renegotiating is probably the best way to go. So let's kind of run through on a few points. Now we come to a checklist, and I won't go through each of these one by one. And some of this may seem really basic, but you'll be amazed how many people don't do it. Basic stuff like a contact database. Does everybody in your company know how to get in touch with everybody else, including your internal employees, customers, suppliers, your laptop provider, your IT person, your facilities coordinator, your logistics company? So if you didn't already have this, probably a good time to build this. Multiple communication channels, right? We've always relied on in-person and email. Younger / tech-based startups do have more, text messaging and things like that when you talk about Slack, Hangout, etc. But now we realize that we do need all three modes. You need audio, video, text. You do need to have that, and secure. IT infrastructure, developing like a key point of contact. Your key point of contact should be able to tell you exactly what to do if someone in your company tests positive. That's basically what a role of a key point of contact is. Test everything, hygiene expectations, going concern status, looking ahead, disruption manager. These are things I can share, but a disruption manager, this is almost like you don't have to have a dedicated person for it. But it's very important to start recording disruptions. Now, a pandemic is a large disruption, but in general as well, are you able to document and record disruptions? And then that will give you insights into how you deal with this in the future as well. Okay. With that quick run through, now we'll go to a few kind of common themes. Now, common themes essentially is, we're going to talk about things that are common across different sectors, across different industries. Of course, this is not everything, but hopefully it'll add value to what you're looking for. So we'll present strategies and notes that run as common themes. And again, we go back to leadership. We talk about building resilience that was mentioned at the beginning as well. So 2020 anyways didn't start off on a great note, right? It was expected to be a year where markets kind of corrected their course. So these are unprecedented times to have a pandemic on top of that. So having a culture of resilience is what is needed at this time. So what's interesting is in Sweden, there's a saying, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right. It's is i magen, which means ice in your belly. So this roughly translates to keeping cool in critical situations. So controlling our mind and remaining calm are kind of the two key traits as leaders. And this is something we have to build actively. But now what's interesting is you're not supposed to have this coolness when you're dealing with your own teams. While you're maintaining social distance, do not let that lead to emotional distance from your team. So you need to have empathy and lead with compassion. What might seem a little counterintuitive is that humans in crisis actually do not go on self-preservation mode. They regularly make sacrifices for the greater common good. And you'll be surprised to find that your team will do the same for you as well. So we have to recognize that and kind of do our best as leaders as well. And finally, building a moat and ring fencing your customers. They will come back, but when they come back, they need to see that, are they going to come back to you, or have they gone to a substitute or an alternate? So brand loyalties are going to change because there will be a big focus on safety and hygiene and things like that, which will dominate the purchasing decisions. So these are certain points from a finance function that's food for thought, essentially. A stress test. Now, procurement costs have gone up, capital costs have gone up, customers have deferred buying decisions. So conducting an exercise to evaluate your financial health is very important. So we conduct this, right? We conduct things that we call a financial stress test, which includes stuff like a probability of default, business continuity, different versions of a business, things like that. Then we come to new launches. Globally, what we are seeing is people are canceling new launches if their impact on the bottom line is going to show up, say, in the next financial year, which is the case with almost all products. You have a gestation period, you have some kind of a ramp up, and probably in 6 months, 9 months, or years when you start seeing the real impact on your bottom line. So you need to postpone these launches because you do not have the luxury to wait for its impact on your P&L. Finally, we come to acquisitions as well. So acquisitions have stalled. It may be for the medium term, but they have stalled, which is expected, right? Because your valuation and terms need to be renegotiated. But what's interesting is that the stalled acquisitions suggest that the investors do have the capital and they do have the interest to invest, but probably now looking actively at stressed assets. Now what that means is as your debt increases, there will be erosion in equity as well. So it's a good time to identify and acquire stressed assets. Identifying targets is something that you can do during this lockdown period and as these restrictions ease gradually. Finally, internal restructuring is something that should be on the top of our radar as well. And then we look at a few other smaller kind of finance functions. E-invoicing. E-invoicing is something that is only recently picked up, but it's something we need to all have. Capability of e-invoicing, digital payments, online reconciliation of bank statements, auto emailing of invoices, reminders, accounts receivable, aging, all of this automated. These are things that are kind of basic now for a digital business. If you don't have even one of these are really essential basics that we need to have. One fine point in this is that your banks and your service providers who provide these services, their commissions need to be looked at closely. They have historically charged very high on such digital payment modes. While some are now kind of reasonable, they're still not sustainable in the long term. So it's something to look at. Then we come to the concept of separating good and bad costs. No discretionary spending, no fancy offices. And, bad costs actually does include bad performers in your company as well. It is important to be ruthless at this time, trim the fat. And that does fall under a bad cost category. It may be a harsh decision to take, but it is required. And the last couple of points when we talk about the $1 trillion problem, so the government actually earns around 60 to 70 billion per week from taxes. So if you extrapolate that, a 5-week lockdown has an enormous impact, right? You're talking about thousands of crores of revenue just lost. We talk about the size of the Indian economy is around 3 trillion. So what you're talking about is that some estimates suggest that the government might lose close to $1 trillion in revenue. So these are not small numbers, right? So when we talk about government relief, government incentives, this kind of puts that also into perspective. Finally, attracting capital. And again, the market's rallying and the fact that we are not as bad as other companies is a great sign for us. Sovereign funds, big wealth funds are eyeing destinations first and then sectors and industries second, which is not how it used to be. So as investors look for countries that have dealt well and not been impacted in a huge way, India has a fair shout to be the #1 destination. So with government reforms and concentrated efforts, we can attract significant capital to India. A few points on data and information in general. So information is not the same as being informed. We all assume that everybody has information, so everybody is kind of aware, everybody knows what we know, things like that. So as leaders, we need to understand that there are too many sources of information, so we need to control the narrative in our own companies. So communicate repeatedly, communicate transparently, and kind of control what you're informing to your team. We talk about intelligence, so we need to have daily kind of updates to make sure that we are make sure that we have relevant information in front of us. And make sure you're avoiding red tape and bureaucracy within your company so that you're empowering people to make fast decisions. So a side note on this, make sure that we're not buying into news stories. So news and media in general, their whole business model revolves around focusing on now, right? Selling today. Well, we need to focus on the bigger picture and things like that. So we need to make sure that we're getting accurate information because it is a rare commodity. And we know it's rare because the entire American public is regularly misguided by their president. So the stakes are pretty high. Finally, we talk about preparation. So we need to prepare, and this might seem like doomsday scenarios, but actually today we need to prepare for the next crisis. We need to build readiness today so that the next crisis does not cause such wide-scale impact on the world. Finally, identifying new customer trends as well. So invest in getting these insights. This data is invaluable. When we talk about the deal of when Facebook picks up stake in Reliance, when you talk about Facebook picking up stake in a telecom company, the primary motivation and the only motivation is data. The numbers say that 50% of the users have a geo connection. Whether they actively use it or not is something to study, but 50% of all mobile connections are a geo connection. That's invaluable data. So once you have that data, what can you do with this data is what comes next. So investing in these kind of insights can really go a long way. We talk about the other thing, which is measuring a rate of metabolism. And this is something that's commonly known in tech companies. In software, you use this phrase a lot. It's a KPI, it's a key performance kind of indicator, which says that the faster you iterate, the faster you make changes, that's a good sign for a tech company because it means you're staying ahead of your competition. So that's what you mean by a faster rate of metabolism, faster rate of change. So when you talk about large companies not being agile, it's because their rate of metabolism is low. So this is a good time to actually start measuring this. Start measuring how you can improve your rate of metabolism, upgrade, update, change course quickly. And finally, do not hide bad news. It is never a good idea. At best, you can feign ignorance later, but at the worst case scenario, you will come across as not being genuine and lose trust in your company along the way. So don't hide kind of bad news. A single slide here on industrial IoT. Now, Internet of Things is, while for many is still a buzzword, but India is just far behind. But at the end of the day, industrial IoT in India has yet to take off at a large scale. But we need to understand that IoT can have a direct impact on the bottom line. It can have improvement in inventory management, maintenance and repair, strategy, waste management, operational safety, efficiency improvement. And two other things, we talk about dynamic pricing and labor productivity. Dynamic pricing has been made famous by kind of Uber, right? What that means is being able to match supply demand and also cost elements. So with IoT, you can do that in your manufacturing companies as well. Now, this is a slide on communication again, and I think we've mentioned it a couple of times, so I won't go through this in too much detail for the sake of time. But there are 2 points I'll just highlight here, that a PR strategy includes internal communication. So make sure you have a strategy. A lot of people don't have a strategy for internal communication and even external communication, but make sure you have a strategy. And etiquette and discipline, and this is to inculcate this in your team. So what this means is self-reporting symptoms, temperature scans before they leave their house, after they get home, social distancing, when they're coughing, what is the etiquette for it? Disinfecting surfaces regularly, things like that. So these are kind of basics, but it's something that you need to communicate and kind of make sure. Like, for example, opening doors with your elbows, right? Like a lot of people now don't want to touch their hands on handles. So but we know that not all doors are designed that way. So can you make small design changes so people can open their doors and close them with elbows, right? So small things like that is the level of detail that you need to look at. A quick note on startups. Startups actually need a liquidity lifeline now. Now, the reasons to invest in innovative new businesses are strengthened now because the market conditions are conducive. See, startups have a long gestation period anyway. By definition, they are disruptive. They're already working on new ideas that are built for the new normal. They'll end up proving product market fit in this environment and they'll build for scale. So it's a good time to kind of look at startup investments. The last two slides before we move to the sector watch section. A note on migrant workers. I think the key question on everyone's mind is, okay, we are ready. We've done all this. We've got our company ready, team ready, supply chain partners ready, but we don't have workers. Where are we going to get them from? They've all gone home, or if they've not gone home, we are also unsure about their, status and their health and safety. So it's just a note on that. There isn't really a good answer to all of this. In fact, I think the latest number from yesterday said that there are 3.5 lakh migrants in Mumbai or Maharashtra who have yet to get home. So we're talking about 110 million people concentrated in Bombay, Delhi, Calcutta, Bangalore, Hyderabad, and Chennai. While the government has put in relief measures, execution is going to be a tall order. So is this something to be just aware about? Finally, when we start off, what do we do? There's going to be a lot of hesitance. People will hesitate. People will be anxious about how they'll deal with it. So the few things that you can do is obviously things like ensure there's a single entry point for everybody. You do some practical planning around social distancing. You have to understand that there are relapses. This concept of immunity has not been proven. So there is a lot of misinformation that, okay, once you have recovered, or there's the concept of herd immunity, but it's not been proven. So there are relapses as well. You need to just understand that. Take a survey of everyone who returns to work. Take their travel history, symptoms, verify that they are agreeing to a new policy, agreeing that, to what their travel history is, etc. Reducing your shifts, lowering your capacity, and being ruthless around a no work, no pay policy as well. Okay. Now we had picked around 7 sectors. In the interest of time, what we are going to do is probably focus just on 1 or 2. We won't go through each one. Let's see. We could probably start with manufacturing is a good one to cover. A few things that we're talking about is sectors that are dependent on high imports, such as electronics, consumer durables, pharmaceuticals, are facing bottlenecks. And so the export focused sectors due to a major drop in demand. So these are some challenges which I won't go through each of them. There are international trade tensions, things like that. But what are the opportunities we look at today? So we spoke about IoT, but there is opportunity to harness the power of machine learning, AI, automation. India is behind the curve from a global perspective, but we can kind of reimagine and rethink this. When you start the operation again, you can look at daily walk-bys, observe hygiene norms. Can you do remote quality checks? Can you develop more collaborative relationship with your suppliers? One thing that a lot of people don't know, which is surprising, is that imports are not necessarily banned. There is a cooling period. If you're talking about medical equipment, certain supplies, this is still happening. So there are logistics companies that are actively doing this. So maybe it's something you could explore as well. And one thing we like to talk about is a digital clone. What this means is that, and we have done this with some companies in the past, but having a digital clone of your business can help simulate different scenarios. So what you can do is when you talk about scenario modeling and different versions of your business, can you have a digital clone which can then play out different scenarios and help you out? This means stuff like, suppose, can you redesign the assembly line? Can you space people a little differently? Can the sequencing be changed? Things like that. And India can emerge as a contract manufacturing hub. This is just a great opportunity in general for us. I'll skip the logistics, aviation sector. I think even travel, tourism, and hospitality. I think one point here to mention is a chief hygiene officer. For service sectors and hospitality in general. We all know if you go to the best hotels or best restaurants, in other cities or even in Bombay or pan India, you go to the bathroom, but it's not clean, right? So while earlier it was just an inconvenience, now people are going to be worried about their safety. So a chief hygiene officer with dedicated roles, dedicated functions is something that is recommended. We will skip through, I think, even retail, except that, one thing is that you need to build trust in a meaningful way. People are spending more time at home. So your marketing strategy needs to be around the fact that the people are at a familiar environment, but they're still isolated. So your marketing strategy can entirely be tweaked just based on this understanding. With technology, I think there will be a tremendous bull run with tech. Might be limited to big tech, but there is significant potential, especially with contactless work. One of the points we had here is that even it may have taken a pandemic, but we're realizing that digitization has to penetrate all businesses. We even mentioned stuff like Google for Work and Office 365, which is kind of basic, but we all need to have it. I know of large companies, hundreds and thousands of crores top line, who don't have video conferencing capabilities. And healthcare. Healthcare is a good one. Healthcare is, what we have understood, that we're globally ill-equipped to handle a crisis like this. And I think healthcare is still seen as a cost, but we have to be trading that off against economic recession. But the good point here is that they're great success stories. We've created a new band of kind of heroes in India's imagination. And what we need to do is now create new habits coming out of this. All right. That brings us almost to the end. From a wrapping up perspective, I'll skip talking about us. We'll share this presentation anyways. Some of the things that we kind of do focus on are, stressed asset turnaround, consulting, restructuring. I think what I could probably mention is that when should you get in touch with us is when you have a problem that needs solving, especially in battling crisis, or if you're looking to increase efficiency or improve processes or reduce cost. And finally, if you're looking to raise capital or strategic partnerships. All right, closing thoughts. The first people to suffer are going to be salaried employees. We have to focus on hygiene standards. And finally, this may feel like a war, and actually in a way it is. When you look back in history and you look back at wartime presidents, wartime prime ministers, you'll find that how they dealt with it was again with resilience. So how we act today will remain in people's memory, even for years to come, long after COVID-19 is forgotten. So the right way perhaps is to look at this and say that we must all kind of collectively press the reset button. That brings us to the end of this particular presentation. We can now move, I think, to certain questions like that.
So Nishit and Mr. Dave and our president, Mr. Vaid, excellent points. I think Nishit, the detail that you went through was simply fabulous. And I think all of us will be eagerly waiting your detailed presentation. So when Dushyant mentioned to me that you had a full presentation, I personally was not sure what detail it would be, but I can see you have a lot of detail and there are a lot of very valid points out there. Adding to that, you see the world economy is about $89 to $90 trillion and the US is about $20 trillion. And as the reports show, out of the 3 million cases, almost 1 million is from the US. And clearly there doesn't seem to be too many signs on it. India is part of a very large global community. And I think India is already affected and will continue to be affected with what happens with the virus globally. Of course, we have a very huge domestic consumption and we have a very large, very good demographic. Our age demographic of 27, 28 years is actually going to give us the fluid in managing the times for the future, whether it's the digital economy, the contactless economy. I think age demographics is going to play a very big role in it. I think one of the major concerns as I see going forward is that the countries of the world are just printing money. The global debt is almost 3 times the global GDP at $260 trillion. And I think as long as countries keep afloat by printing money, we may have a different order going forward. Adding to what you already said, I think one of the key takeaways of the COVID crisis is the need for physical connection. Right now, in the last 30 odd days of the lockdown, people who have actually helped us or who we are able to connect are people who we have a physical connection with, not the online connection, not the arm's length connection that otherwise erstwhile we were operating on, where we were just placing orders or dealing with people without knowing their names, just looking at either price or quality. I think the human factor is very important going forward. And this entire work from home concept, I think there are 2 points which are evolving, which we have to be very careful about. One is this work from home is allowing a lot of company data, be it on your ERP machines or your computer systems, to be available to all employees. Because they need to work on it, we have lost the connect of security. So I think more steps will have to be taken to ensure security going forward of our data, our customer database, our everything, from contracts to your tenders to everything. The other thing is, I think there's a big demand going to be for remote monitoring because of this work from home kind of conditions, whether it lasts for 3 months, 6 months. I had the opportunity to hear a very senior doctor who said that this may not be the only virus. We may well have another major virus, maybe not today, maybe in 10 years, maybe at a later date. So we have to get ourselves geared for the future. We have to plan for the future. We have to build for the future. Another point I think is that I would like the 2 speakers and our president to just say, I think nothing is being talked about how, we have all been locked down in jail, how we are going to basically deal with post-lockdown. Are we going to run into the streets trying to buy everything that we can get and socialize till no end come? Or can we have some kind of guidelines or some kind of these of course are guidelines, these are just kind of advisories so that people can be a little bit, have a little sense of purpose. Because the worst thing would be that this virus, which we have managed to contain, just suddenly escalates. I'll just leave 2 more points. So India has, during lockdown, we had lots of problems. So I think a lot of people have been trying to get remote access to services. For example, for home services, for computer services, people are doing services online. But in the meanwhile, there have been millions of devices which have gone offline. I read a report which said that almost 10 million mobiles are not functioning, 100,000 refrigerators, 75,000 TVs, almost 50,000 washing machines in Mumbai alone, in India alone, have gone off the grid. So you can imagine people are going to come back in these sectors. You can take it as granted that these sectors, for example, people will come back with vengeance to buy and stock up. So I think there's going to be a fair bit of panic buying the moment this opens up. And to end with, I think Modi ji, in his Modi 1, now we are in lockdown 2, but in Modi 1, he came up with 2 very good things which we didn't all connect with. India has over 500 million internet users. And in Modi 1, with Digital India, getting everybody connected on Jan Dhan, we had 300 million accounts. I think this has helped at least the rural India to have access to capital in these lockdown times, coupled with Swachh Bharat, which has put a toilet into almost every district, every area, has really, I think, helped to contain this virus. And I think we must look at these long-term goals in a more meaningful manner going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
You say
May
something.
yeah, President, over to you.
No, that's fine. Absolutely. That's really well summed up, Anant. Hats off to you. And you're absolutely right that Modi gave us this Swachh Bharat and the Jan Dhan bank accounts, which in these times of difficult times, monies could be transferred to everyone's accounts. Otherwise, I don't know how we would ever do it. And in fact, that's the major problem, that today, how do you reach the grains to the people? How do you reach the thing? Are there leakages going to happen? These are the major problems in our system, which unfortunately we didn't address for so many years, but now the government is waking up to them. So I think you're right that it depends a lot on the systems, and luckily going forward in the digital way and things getting linked up and hooked up will help us a lot in the long run. And thanks a lot, Dushyant Bhai and Nishit. You have really done a fantastic presentation, which has given an overall bird's eye view of what the scene is and how we need to take it forward post-COVID. And yes, how we must how must we prepare for our businesses for that also. So I think it's really been a nice, and I'm really happy that we had so many participants today. And I hope there's a little bit of take home for everyone this evening.